Commission to order. Today is Wednesday, August 5th. It is 8:35 a.m. We're in the Sierra Room at 851 East William Street, Carson City. And I'm going to read a disclosure into the record. Members of the public who wish to provide live public comment may do so during the designated public comment periods indicated on the agenda via telephonic appearance by dialing the numbers below, which are 408-418-9388, meeting ID 146-965-4653. Please do not join by phone if you do not wish to make public comments. So having read that into the record, Tamar, can we have a roll call, please?
Chairperson Bonkowski, Vice Chair Kimbrough, Commissioner Bagwell, here. Commissioner McQuarrie,
here.
Commissioner Stedfield.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, agenda management notice. The chair may take items on the agenda out of order, combine 2 or more agenda items for consideration, and or remove an item from the agenda or delay discussion relating to an item on the agenda at any time. Agenda item number 3 is for disclosures. Any member of the RTC board have any disclosures this morning? Chaz?
No.
Thank you. We are now on agenda item number 4, our first public comment. Desi, is there anybody on the line for public comment?
I see one caller, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Caller, it is your turn for public comment. Please state your name for the record.
Yes, greetings. This is Mark Elias with First Transit, and I'm just on an invite from Lucia to listen to the meeting.
Thank you, Mark. We are not going to be taking public comment during the board item, so is there anything that you wanted to say prior to the action item coming up for the contract?
Sure. Well, greetings. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the board. As I stated, my name is Mark Elias. I'm the Region Vice President for First Transit in the Pacific Northwest. And just wanted to say, extremely excited for your consideration and for the opportunity to partner with Carson City and perform your transportation services. And looking forward to many safe and reliable years of transportation in the service of Carson City. And that's all I have in terms of comments, unless there's any questions for me.
Thank you, Mark. As you mentioned, we may call on you to answer questions during the public meeting item, but I want to give you the opportunity for public comment as well, so thank you. At this time, we are moving on to the public meeting item, item 5A, for possible action. Discussion and possible action regarding contract number 193-00178, Jump Around Carson Public Transportation Operations Services to First Transit, Inc., for the operation of all Jack Fixed Route and Jack Paratransit services for 3 years for an amount of $1,122,736 in year 1, $1,167,816 in year 2, and $1,219,841 in year 3, for a total not to exceed amount of $3,510,393 for the first 3-year term, with an option for 3 additional 1-year terms. Lucia, are you going to start this and hand it over to Alex?
Alex is there to represent the staff, but I'll take care of it unless you have specific questions for him.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lucia Maloney, Transportation Manager for the record. Good morning, and thank you for taking the time to be here for a special meeting of the RTC this morning. As you know, Jack is operated by a contract operator. Currently, we utilize MV Transportation, and they've been with us with our current contract since October of 2016. The contract was scheduled to expire on September 30th. An RFP was distributed and published on May 1st of this year and closed on June 2nd. 2 proposals were received, and First Transit was determined to be the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Notice of selection went out, and MV subsequently provided a notice of contract termination for August 30th, which is a Sunday. Consequently, time is of the essence. First Transit has requested that should this contract move forward, the sooner we can get a notice to proceed to them, the sooner they can initiate hiring. We're trying to retain as many existing drivers as possible and dispatchers, moving them forward, but that takes time and there's some training involved as well. So we do appreciate you coming in for the special meeting this morning. There are several exhibits as part of your staff report. Exhibit 1 has the contract as proposed. About 10 minutes before the start of this meeting, it was brought to my attention that the contract inadvertently excluded the technical proposal, which is important. It's the scope of work for the contract. So I've sent that out and distributed that as late material electronically to the board. It's also been distributed to the RTC stakeholder list, as well as put up on our website. Exhibit 2 is the red line contract. And the intent there is just to show the board and be fully transparent. There were some changes to the city's contract template as part of contract negotiations for this specific contract. So we wanted you to be able to see those. We worked very closely with Todd Reese on all of those, and Todd as well worked with Dan Yu. So staff are confident that that those changes are acceptable. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, and Todd's here as well. Exhibit 3 provided for you is that notice of termination from MV. They did feel that it would provide adequate transition time, and working closely with Mark Elias and his team, we've already started that transition. Really, we're just looking for the notice to proceed at this point to formalize some of the hiring, some of the administrative things. I would like to draw your attention to Exhibit 4 of the staff report, and this starts on packet page as PDF. It's a PDF page 77, and so that is packet page 77. There you go. And in here we compare the price of our existing contract with MV. Currently, for the option year that we're in for 19 and 20, we have a maximum not to exceed of $844,898. MV's proposal for year 1 was $1.582 million, and with an escalation clause. And then First Transit proposal is shown there on packet page 77 as well, and their year 1 cost is $1.144 million. If you scroll down in that Exhibit 4, there is detailed budget line items comparing across the current contract with the option year, the MV proposal, and the First Transit proposal. I'm happy to answer questions to the best of my ability on any of those individual line items. And if you scroll down to the very last page in the packet, it shows as attachment D, variable and fixed costs proposal. I wanted to speak to this for a moment. So with our current contract, we receive invoices from our current contract operator for what's called revenue hours of service. And so they take the hours that they're in service, driving the bus, cleaning the bus, fueling the bus, and those hours have a single rate. Currently, we're paying $35.11. Now, what happens is over time, like anything else, there's turnover and some of the managerial staff where their salaries are built into that revenue service hour. And there's vacancies and different things that happen. And it's very challenging for me and the city staff to manage and make sure that we're getting what we're paying for. So I spoke about some of my concerns with Mark Elias and the First Group team, and they sent over this proposal, which is sort of a different pricing structure. And I think it's much more fair and transparent for Carson City to be able to nimbly manage the contract. And so what's different is there'll be a monthly fixed cost, and you see that here in this little data table, starting in year 1 of $42,440.57. And so what that covers is really those managerial staff. So First Transit has proposed a general manager. He's coming to us. He's managed transit up in Portland, has vast experience in safety. I met him. He sounds very competent. He's very excited to move down to Carson City. I believe he's already initiated that move with his family. And then they've proposed an operations manager. He's been managing operations of paratransit down in Las Vegas for a different company. Again, very experienced, really excited to come up to Carson City from Vegas, and who wouldn't be this time of year when it gets really hot. But the managerial team that they propose is very strong, and I think it's a really good thing for Carson City. And it also covers the dispatchers, so their salaries as well as some of the corporate overhead. So regardless of levels of service, if hours go way up, if there's a pandemic and hours go way down, this covers First Transit. At the same time, then there's the revenue service hour dollar for the regular Jack fixed route assist, and that can fluctuate based on actual city usage of the service. So we're not paying for what we're not using. I want to stop here and see if there were any questions on this cost structure that staff are recommending.
Any questions from any of the commissioners? Chaz? Any questions, Chaz?
Excellent.
No, thank you.
Go ahead, Lucia.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hold on, Lucia.
Lucia, I'm sorry, I do have a question. When I'm looking at attachment D, it says that the 3-year additional options will be exercised at the city's discretion, and the price will be negotiated prior to contract renewal. How much notice and time are we going to do that so that we know if we have to go back out to bid? Where's the time constraints for the negotiation to renew the options?
Happy to take direction on that from you, Supervisor. For the option year for MV this last year, I believe we came in June or July and brought that amendment for that option year to RTC. As a desire of the board or to come in earlier, we could certainly do that. I think that would be probably very beneficial.
Well,
Supervisor,
yeah. Is it somewhere?
it is Supervisor Bagwell. If you look at the red line for the contract on contract section 3.2, it states that the options are going to be exercised by a mutual written agreement between the parties and approved by the RTC no fewer than 60 days prior to the end of the then current term.
Well, I guess my true question of that is 60 days is not enough time to go do an RFP and get a new vendor if we don't come to a mutual term. Am I missing something? How long did it take us to do this one?
No, you're not missing anything, Supervisor. We started this process in in April to get the scope together for the RFP.
Right. So I guess the only thing I have in here is that you're going to bring me the contract option at 60 days. So does that mean you'll just automatically back that up long enough if you need an RFP? Because what I get concerned about is if the vendor is aware, do they have an opt-out like this one did that cut us a month early?
Yes, they do. One suggestion, Supervisor, if you and I probably an information later this fall.
Lucia, can you start over, Lucia? Lucia, can you start over? You were breaking up there. We didn't hear anything that you said.
I apologize. Can you hear me now? We good?
Sort of.
One suggestion would be to bring back an informational item in the fall to discuss kind of the long-term plans of transit. Staff recognize this is a big jump in contract total, and we would get additional longer-term direction from the board on that. So we could do that maybe October or November.
Todd, at the commission's discretion, so at the end of the 3 years, if we have 60 days written into the contract that we have to provide notice, no fewer than 60 days, so we could give them notice at 90 days, 120 days, 150 days, 180 days.
Well, we have to have a written, okay.
That's Supervisor Bonkowski. Generally, that's correct. In section 7.1, there's a termination clause that says either party may terminate the contract upon 45 days prior written notice. So to terminate the contract, at least 45 days notice is required. I believe the purpose of the 60 days notice in the extension for the additional 1-year terms, it's contemplated to meet that 60 days notice and to get it to the RTC before that. There's going to need to be negotiations happening at least several months beforehand. So I think that was set at the 60 days was meant to set the last piece of it before the RTC. But if the board had preferences on certain timelines that it wanted to put into the contract, I think that could happen.
So to Commissioner Bagwell's point in section 7.1, is 45 days going to be a long enough period? If we get a termination letter and we only have 45 days to find a replacement vendor, Lucia, that doesn't seem like that's a long enough time. It seems like that needs to be probably 120 days.
Unless mutually agreed upon.
I think there's very little risk. I think there's very little risk of that happening. In this case, MV sent the letter because they weren't selected for the next contract. First Transit has said they want this business, and I think there's very little risk of that. Extending the timeline, I think I can see where you're trying to go with this. I don't think it's necessary, but at your direction, we could certainly do that.
Idea. So, Lucia, and maybe we have the vendor on the phone. Maybe what's bothering me is this is either party may terminate by just giving 45 days notice. Can it be that either party can terminate with 120 days notice or mutually agreed upon? I guess that's the part that this is a unilateral, I'm done, and 45 days doesn't, either way, it would be terrible for them too if we only gave them 45, and I don't mind 45 if we mutually agree. I just think that's too short if we're not in mutual agreement. So can we, put 120 days unless mutually agreed? The unilateral this way and mutually agreed anytime.
My concern before you answer, Lucia, is that I have entered into or reviewed hundreds and hundreds of contracts where I went into these contracts thinking there's no possible chance of this scenario ever happening. And then when it happens, it's too late. So I'd rather make sure, so we can say that there's almost no risk, but if there's no downside to doing it, then my feeling is always that we should clean it up and have adequate provisions in the contract. So now I'll let you answer. Did we lose you, Lucia?
This is Darren. Can you hear me?
I apologize. I'm sorry.
Lucia,
We can hear you, Darren.
Okay, I would just Lucia will jump in, I'm sure, when she can. The one downside I would see with the 120 days is that that could impact us. We will be held to that same standard, and like was stated, we have a good relationship right now with this new vendor coming in, and we don't anticipate anything going wrong. But it does, should that happen, that 120 days is also put on us in terms of walking away. So that would be, it's all risk. I get that. But that would be one downside with extending that time. The other thing is that although the 45 days is short, and that does not give us time to put together an RFP or a formal process to find a new vendor, there are groups out there that will come in on an emergency basis and operate your transit system for you on a month-by-month basis until you can figure it out. So there is a little bit of something that we could fall on if we needed to.
And just help me here a little bit, Darren, because this has a federal award that is attached to it. Does the federal award allow emergency services without bid to be able to get the 50/50? Because the volume of dollar here isn't going to allow us not to bid under normal conditions. Does this have an emergency provision in the federal grant that takes that away, relieves that burden, and we wouldn't be in it 100%?
Yeah, Supervisor Bagwell, that's a very good question, and I can't say without a doubt, but I'm fairly confident that there would be a provision there, because this does happen where things come up and somebody a vendor for whatever reason can't perform, and you want to keep the service going. So I'm very confident that would be allowed, but I'm not totally sure. There's a slight risk there. So I understand that they're going to 120 days. I really do.
So let's turn this around, Darren and Lucia. What is the appropriate number of days if we had to put out an RFP or RFQ to put it out, have your 30-day application period, and come back with a contract? If it's not 120 days and we aren't comfortable with 45 days, what is the appropriate number?
When we were in a cure letter situation with MV last year, we did actually reach out to First Transit to see if they could provide emergency services for us. And their turnaround, they said, was 45 to 60 days. And that was just at that time. And we didn't enter into any contract negotiations or anything like that. That was just sort of at the top of his head with the salesperson I spoke with.
Mark, can you confirm that?
Yes, I can. This is Mark Elias. Yes, I can confirm that. I would also, throw out there as a possibility, if the challenge here is that 45 days isn't long, or 60 days isn't long enough to make a decision on the renewal years, perhaps we could change that piece to 120 days. So in other words, the renewal years or the option years need to be approved 120 days prior to the end of the term that we're in, or the contract year that we're in, versus changing the termination language. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. Lucia, Darren, comments?
I think that's a great idea.
It's better. It's better than what we have right now.
We're making progress.
Right.
All right, so we'll come back to that when we make a motion, but I suspect that will probably make it into the motion. Are there any additional questions on the contract from Lucia? Greg? Chaz?
No.
Okay. Do you have further information to present, Lucia?
Just two final comments, Mr. Chair. Thank you. In the technical proposal that was provided as late material, again, my apologies. I wanted to highlight that the proposal and the contract that we're approving today is to maintain existing service levels. So any additional service, such as that contained in the long-range transit plan, those aren't budgeted for or insured with this contract. We're not tying the hands of the service expansion right now. I also wanted to wrap up by drawing your attention to the fiscal impact section. We included a number of federal grants referenced in the fiscal impact section. The CARES Act grant that we received, that Carson City received of $3.7 million. That is reimbursable at 100%. Because that grant is reimbursable at 100%, and with existing apportionments that go to CAMPO, through CAMPO to Jack, there is ample funding available for the full 3-year contract term of this without having to increase transfer amount above and beyond the current, which is $466,300 annually. So with that, I'm happy to answer any additional questions. Thank you.
So Lucia, that may take us through the initial 3-year term of this contract, but does not address the option periods or any future contracts. So you had mentioned earlier in your presentation that you could bring an agenda item back a little later this year to talk about the long-term fiscal impacts. Can you kind of expound on that and kind of lay out what your thoughts are and what the future impacts may be and how we might address those through either service reductions or increased revenue? Can you just kind of walk us through all your thoughts on that?
I will do my best. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This board, RTC staff, we have adopted the Transit Development and Coordinated Human Services Plan, which takes existing service levels and then over time, should funding be available, potentially expand into Davis for into Lyon County for a Lifeline service, potentially go down into the Walmart, which would have fiscal impacts as it relates to paratransit, and potentially add a new route up into Northridge and down around the Solomon neighborhood. Those things, in light of the costs of this new contract and where this industry and transit generally seems to be headed with regard to how much it costs to operate, I think it makes sense to revisit our transit plan with RTC and talk about those things that we had thought were likely in the future for those service expansions. But now, in light of the pandemic and these costs, maybe we want to revisit and be a little bit more conservative with where we're headed in the future. There are limited options for being more efficient. We operate very efficiently. We receive actually extra FTA 5307 apportionment each year because we're one of the top most efficient operations in the country. And so there's very little we can do to do more riders per revenue service hour, more for less. That said, we understand that funding is limited and there may be there's areas where we could reduce, such as days of service or hours of service. And so there's some things like that we could look at and discuss. With regard to additional revenue options, there are, again, limited options, but I think if the board was open to discussing, kind of very options, we could certainly go in that direction as well.
So Lucia, a couple of points. First, for reducing service, how does that affect our obligations under this contract? So on your chart here, you had hours set for the fixed route service of 16,275 revenue service hours, in Jack Assist 9,870. Miscellaneous 500 revenue service hours. So are there any obligations that we would need to change in the contract if we were to reduce services?
I'm trying to find a page in the red line, but we did add to the contract a provision related to 15%. So should the city decide to either increase service or reduce service by 15%, First Transit would have the opportunity to discuss that with us, and we could mutually agree if the fiscal structure needed to change. Page.
While you're looking for that, my other comment was that page 70, Mark says, My other comment was that, rate increases for the fares don't get us to where we want to go. If we doubled it from $1 to $2, then, that gets us, an additional like $40,000 a year, which isn't really going to make a big difference.
That's correct. Last year, we brought in about $65,000 in fare box revenue. So doubling that would be double of that.
Right. The comment was if all the riders continued to ride. Okay, so the section that we were referencing is 24.2 in the red line. The line reads, however, where schedule readjustments impact by 15% or more the service levels or equipment levels required, the parties agree to renegotiate the contracted fixed costs and revisit the need to add, remove fixed support, such as dispatchers and road supervisors. This ensures minimized risk for both the city and the contractor in the event that the service levels change. Okay, so there is the risk that we could reduce service and end up paying the same amount of money.
And maybe Mark could speak to that further. When we were discussing this, the idea was if the city decided we had a bunch of money and we wanted to add a bunch of routes out to Dayton in order to maintain service levels, First Transit would request, we would anticipate that they would need an extra dispatcher or a road safety supervisor. And so we would renegotiate that fixed cost portion, which would of course come back to RTC. If we reduce service levels again, such that right now the proposed 2 dispatchers aren't needed, yes, I think the fixed cost would stay the same if we're looking for kind of the moderate service reduction that I believe is possible, but also likely. It would take a huge service reduction to go down to just 1 dispatcher. So to your comment, Supervisor, it's likely that the fixed cost would stay the same without completely kind of gutting the service.
Which would negate the reason for the service reduction. Mark, do you have any comments on that?
Well, yes. So we would have to decide as partners, what kind of office or administrative support we needed to retain based on the modifications to service. If it's a large reduction in service, then perhaps we would only need 1 manager, or we could downsize one of the management positions to say a safety supervisor or something like that. So there are creative ways to address reducing the fixed costs, but the advantage of having the fixed and variable model that we've put together for this proposal, or that is in front of the board today, is that you would definitely see, obviously, a savings in your variable costs, so in the hours that we are billing, because there'd be less hours to bill. So for minor reductions in service, say 12%, 13%, 14%, you would see that savings with less hours billed, and we wouldn't have to go through jumping through a bunch of hoops to figure out new pricing, because we have a fixed and variable, so our staff is covered, and you're just paying less in variable hours. Same can be said for a large reduction in terms of the variable hours. While the rate might adjust, it would only adjust according to volume, and First Transit would not expect to make the same amount of money if we were doing a lot less service. We would, however, hope to at least get the percentage of return that we had bid. But the savings would still be seen in the reduced volume and less hours billed. Does that make sense, sir?
It does. Thank you, Mark. That was very informative. All right, so Lucia, then I think that unless somebody disagrees with me here on the commission, I think the direction to you would be to bring back this discussion item to look at the financial impacts going forward for the JAC system sometime this fall, so that the commissioners can be fully informed. Because if we're looking in 3 years at having to figure out how to come up with possibly $300,000 or $400,000 annually out of the general fund. It's a big impact, and it means that we're going to take away from some other service. So I want to make sure that not only we're on the commission are fully informed, but have the ability to communicate our concerns to the Board of Supervisors.
We can do that, Supervisor. Thank you.
All right, do we have any other questions or comments on the contract from the commissioners?
Good questions, though.
Chaz, any questions, comments?
No, I don't.
Lori? Okay, then I will bring this back to the commission and entertain a motion.
I move to award the contract as presented with the change from 60 days to 120 days in section 3.2.
We have a motion, do we have a second? We have multiple seconds.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am,
Mr. Chair,
yes?
would it be possible to amend the motion to also include the late material in the contract that was provided?
The contract as presented, which includes the late material with the change from 60 days to 120 days in section 3.2.
Do we have continuing seconds?
I'll second it.
All right, we have a second. We have a motion and a second. The motion is to approve the contract as presented, including the late material, and to change section 3.2 from 60 days to 120 days. Any final discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Mark. We are now moving on to agenda item 6, board comments for information only. Any of the commissioners have any comments?
Just in general, if you have an opportunity during the Board of Supervisors retreat or something, Darren and Lucia, I think this should kind of be out there on that long-term horizon and planning, so it doesn't, as the chair said, I don't want it just to stay at RTC. Thank you, Darren.
Right, I would include that Sherry Russell needs to be brought into this conversation as well.
I'm saying
Yeah.
much broader picture here. Thank you.
Chaz, any board comments?
Yes, I will be on vacation for the next couple of weeks, and so I will not be at the next regular RTC meeting.
Who knows what we'll volunteer you for?
Yeah, right.
You're gonna be chairman and vice chairman when you get back.
That's right.
All right, then we will move on to agenda item 7. The next meeting is tentatively scheduled for 4:30 PM, Wednesday, August 12th, right here in the Sierra Room, immediately after the CAMPO meeting ends. We are now on agenda item 8 for final public comment. Desi, is there anybody on the line for final public comment?
There is no final public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Then we are on agenda item 9 for adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.